Hello everyone, in this section I'm going to show you how we can build a web scraper for the site Nordstrom.com. So Nordstrom is a clothing store and I've been asked if I could write a scraper for this site, and I agreed to make a public tutorial for it. And the best part about this section is I'm going to teach you how we reverse engineer the site of Nordstrom and find a API that we can use instead of having to parse the HTML and scrape the site using request or puppeteer. So we actually take a little backdoor, so to say, so we get really pure data, and we can use that to display the scraping results. So what we're going to build is we're first of all going to reverse engineer, find the API for Nordstrom. And then we're going to build a little front end inside of React. And we're going to make it so you can select the amount of items you want, like 5 items. And then you can search for the items that you want. So for example, red dresses. And then we're going to get the results from inside of Nordstrom. So if you search for red dresses, these are the results that we're getting back. So we are also, of course, going to make a backend, a small backend in Node.js Express, and then we have the front end, like I said, inside of React. And we're also going to be snooping around to find out how to get the API from Nordstrom. So I hope you will enjoy this section. I'll see you in the next lecture where we are start to set up the project. So when I was originally making this project, I just tried to do a simple request instead. So I went into Nordstrom.com. In here where we have the searches, I went in and searched for something search query like red dresses. And then I tried to disable JavaScript because I want to see, can the site run without JavaScript? If the site can run without JavaScript, it means that we can use request instead, which uses less resources than Puppeteer or Selenium and so on does. So this little plugin here, it's called just something like disable JavaScript. You can just search for it. It's a Chrome plugin. So I click that, and I can see that the site is still being rendered, which means that the site can run without JavaScript. Cool enough. So then what I did is I went ahead and tried to use request to download the site, but I had some issues getting the same result in request as I had inside of the browser. So I tried to find out what I was doing wrong and so on. And then suddenly I stumbled upon some API keys here. And I love getting API keys because this means I can use an API instead of having to build a scraper. Especially if the API says something like query service API key, public API key. What we're doing actually is doing a query here. When you search, you're doing a query. And so query service API sounds very promising. So let's go ahead and enable JavaScript again, because we're talking with some APIs. That means we need to have JavaScript enabled. Now let's see what happens if we clear this one and I make a search for red dresses. Okay, then I'm gonna stop the recording so it stops putting out more results. And basically, if you want to keep an eye out if there's any sort of APIs that you can use, take a look at how the the network request is being made. Here we have a network request that is only for a document type, so we can't use that for a API. What you want to look for is something like a JSON response instead, or XHR. What I did is I searched for query instead. And query service API is what I saw inside of the source here for the site. Query service API key. And well, if you look here, there's two requests. The first one is for a HTTP options, to get options for the request you can make, I guess. And here's a HTTP get. And if I look inside of the response here and copy that inside of Visual Studio to see how it looks like, it's going to look like this. So here we have a JSON with a products array, and here's the name, dress, the population, so sequin mini dress. And funny enough, that's the same result we have over here. And I'm just gonna put Visual Code next to Google Chrome so you can see both. And that's going to match up with what we have for the first result here, if you see that. Trusted population, so sequin. Average rating 4.1. Number of reviews 158. Lots of info. An image as well. Then yeah, lots of images. We also have a price here, original min price, original max price, same as we see in here. And yeah, so here we have Emory scoop backdress, it's this one. And so that's basically the same information that we see on the page, except for this time it's inside of an API. And it's very nicely formatted, this data inside of the JSON, compared to having to parse the HTML, find out which HTML element you need to select to get this data, or the images, and so on. So basically, if you want to try and find an API first, look in the network tab at the request. See if you can find something that looks like an API is being called. It can be difficult if it's a large site like this one. The second option is to look inside of the source of the site. Try to just search for API. See if you can find any strings that look like a API is being called. You can also look in sources sometimes of the page and try and look inside of the page source. Basically snoop around a little bit in the source, network tabs, try and look for an API you can use. Sometimes you're lucky. It's gonna save you a lot of work. It is worth looking for an API, definitely. Again, if you can't do that, then try and render the site without JavaScript, like disabling JavaScript with the plugin like I did. If you can run it without JavaScript, then move on to use request. And last option, if you can't render the site without JavaScript, use Puppeteer. So Puppeteer is like the last option to use. Now on to the next section, we're going to try and run the API inside of Postman and start building our backend. Okay everyone, so just a brief recap. On the last section, we looked into the Nordstrom site and we tried to find an API, or rather discover where there's an API inside Nordstrom site that we can use to extract results. And we found something inside of this query where there's a response that looks exactly like the same data, the addresses we're trying to get here. So now the next step we want to try now is to replicate calling this API, getting the result inside of Postman instead of inside of a browser inside the Nordstrom web app. So we're gonna try and do that, and let's see how it goes. So as I search for query inside the network tab, when I search on the Nordstrom site like we did in the last section, we have the query down here with the HTTP GET, and for the query e-commerce API. So I'm going to take this URL here and copy that. And then I'm going to open up Postman. So if you don't have Postman already, just go ahead and download it. Google Postman, download it. It's a free app to make API calls in if you're not familiar with it already. So I'm starting up Postman here and opening a new tab. And then I'll just paste in the URL here that we had inside of the Chrome tab where we search for query and find the hidden secret API. So I'm gonna press send, make sure it's HTTP GET. And now it gives us an error. It says for one unauthorized, and it says a valid API key is required. So we need to find an API key, and well, in the last section, there was a part inside of the source where there was an API key. Now, if we also try and look inside of the request headers in here, inside of Google Chrome, we can see there's a header for authorization that says API key, and then it has the API key in here. So what we can do is to replicate this header inside the request from Chrome where it says authorization and paste in the API key. So let's go ahead and do that. Go to the headers tab in Postman and type in authorization. Paste in the API key. Actually paste in the text as it says in here. I don't think it's usual that they write API key before they write the API key, but I mean, every API is different. I mean, there's just some developers who made this and they make weird quirks sometimes. Anyway, we try with this header now. Now it says another error. Now it says unable to parse the request version. Include a valid Nord API version header in the request. So it's even so nice to tell us that we need the Nord API version header inside of our request. So let's go and look inside the Chrome request again, and we can see there is a header that is called Nord API version, and it has a value of 1. So let's go ahead and go in the header tab again inside of Postman, paste in the Nord API version, and put in 1. And let's see if it works now. So we get some nice data now, and you can see dress the population through sequin mini dress, which is this one here. So it's not exactly the same order of items, but you're definitely getting some items using this API call. Now let's see what else can we change. So inside of the query parameters, this params tab, we can also set how many items we want. So if you want 10 items, we just set 10, and then we get more data. We get 10 items instead. We can also change the search term here to be something like green. Then remember, it needs to be URI encoded, I think it's called. So the space is encoded as a %20 sign. We can do that automatically inside of our JavaScript later. Don't worry about it. I'm just trying to show you that you can enter in keywords now. So now we're searching for green dresses instead, and we get results for this. I'm not quite sure what include facets mean. I haven't dig into that yet. But I'm just gonna leave it at false, as it is by default inside of the Nordstrom site. Now what we can do is, we have seen how to perform the API query inside of Postman. The next step now is to build our backend so we can query on our backend. And then we can query to the Nordstrom API from the backend and return results from our own backend. Now, the reason we make a backend is because most of the time these APIs have something called CORS setup, which means that not every site can just query from the Nordstrom site and return it on the app you're making, the front-end app we're going to make. So we need to make our own backend usually, apply our own CORS headers. If you don't know exactly what this means, we're going to get to it in the next section, or the next one again, and you'll see what I mean. But for now, we are getting the API results fine inside of Postman. Next up is making the backend in Node.js Express. Now we are actually going to go and make a project where we are going to utilize the API that we just found. So I'm going to make a directory. I will call it Nordstrom Scraper. And go inside the directory, cd Nordstrom Scraper, and then initialize npm init -- yes. Once we initialize the project or the npm, I'm going to open the folder inside of Visual Studio Code. Now inside Visual Studio Code, I'm going to make a folder here. I will call it the backend. And we're going to put an index.js file in here. Then we're going to add some packages now. We're going to add our trusty old request and request promise. Let me just enhance that so you can see the text. So request, and I need to add yarn add request package, request promise, and we also need to add the express package. So express is a way to make REST APIs inside of Node.js. So we add those, and now we go ahead and write our backend. So the first thing we have is we have express. So we say require express. And then we make what's called, we call it app, where we initialize express. And what we do then is we say app listen what port we want to run on. So we say we run it on port 4000. Then we have a function that runs once the Node.js API is running. So we write console log server running on port 4000. Just like that. And then I'm going to run the API in the terminal here. So I'll do cd backend to the folder here containing the index.js. And then I'll run nodemon index.js. If you don't have nodemon installed already, go ahead and install it using npm install -g and nodemon. So the -g makes it a global install, which means that you can use it anywhere inside of your terminal. And nodemon is great because when we make changes inside index.js, it's going to automatically reload the changes. So if we change this to something like that, it's going to automatically start the script again, so you don't have to type node index.js all the time. You can just have this nodemon running instead. So now we have our Node.js Express server running, but we're actually not able to use it so much because we don't have any endpoints we're listening to. And that's what we're going to do now. So let's say app.get, and we'll say /Nordstrom. And then we can have a request. So this is the request parameters we get in. I'll get into that longer next time. And then response, and then next. So this one is basically how you're calling the API. What parameters are you sending as you're calling the API? We'll get into that next. Res is what you use to send a response back from the API to the user. And next is something you run. You can run next, like middleware stuff. We're not going to be using that in this section. Now I want to make a little disclaimer here and say you could make a course about this, about Node.js Express, and there's a lot of courses out there about Node.js Express. I'm not going to go into detail and teach you how everything that there is to know about Node.js Express. This is just to get you up and running, having a scraping API running. So if you want to know more about Node.js Express, there's a lot of great courses out there you can take. So please don't be discouraged if some of this just doesn't make sense to you. It's basically a whole course in itself to learn. But this is going to get you up and running a web scraping API. So if you follow me step by step, don't worry, we are going to get through this and you will have a web scraping API in no time. Next up is we want to make a call to this API that we just discovered. And so we had this API, we had it inside of Postman. Let me see if I can get Postman up and running here. So here we have the URL that we came to, that we found out was working with the parameters here, the query parameters and the headers. So let's just copy the URL here. And you know what, let's first try and just get this API running. Let's try and say a hello world, just so you can see how it is running. So now it is running on this endpoint where we do a GET request on this endpoint here, Nordstrom. And it's going to return a hello world. So if we do inside of Postman, if you type in HTTP and you type in localhost and you say 4000 and you say Nordstrom, then it's going to say hello world. And that's just pure text. It's not JSON, but basically you now have an API running on Node.js on your own local computer on port 4000 on the Nordstrom endpoint. But we obviously want to return the Nordstrom API results instead, so we can use them inside of our React client. Let me show you how we do this. So we have the URL. I copied that from the Postman request we did before in the previous section. And so let me see. So I copy that in here and I say I copied it into a variable const URL. And now we're going to try and make a request inside of our API. So remember in the previous lecture we imported request also. Well, we're going to start using that now. So let's import request here. Require request promise. What I want to show you now is, remember in the Postman API, we found out we needed these two headers. We needed the authorization header with the API key, and we also needed the Nord API version in the header. So you need to have those inside the request import as well. And we're just going to set it by default to have that in here. So we say .defaults, and then we put in our headers. We can put that in here. And then we make one header that's called authorization, and we paste in the API key we have here that we made inside of a Postman. Paste it in here. Then the Nord API version, and we set that to 1. So now we have the same headers that we had inside of Postman that we found out was working to get to the results inside of the API. Now, all that is left now is to do a little request and return it. So let's see. So we have, this is going to return the JSON. So we say request. Actually, let me use await also because it's an async request. So we want to use await. So request.get URL. And then we say res. So res send JSON. So res is the object you can use inside to send JSON. And now, since we're using await inside here, I'm going to have async in front of the function here. Okay, now let's see what is going on when we try to make a request to the Nordstrom endpoint now inside of our API. So before it was just hello world. Let's see what it says now. It still says hello world. Okay, that's because we're doing a resend hello world up here. So it's never getting down to this part. So I just removed the resend hello world here. And let's try again. And there we go. So we return, oops. we get lots of, actually, it is JSON, but it's like formatted like text in here. So we need to, you can see the headers of the response here is saying content type text HTML. So we need to also set the header to be a content type of JSON. So that's pretty easy to do. We just do res.header, or no, res.set header, and we say content type, and we pass in application/JSON. And that is going to make Postman and other applications recognize that this is JSON that we're receiving. Now let's try and do it again. And now it gets prettified, or it gets formatted as JSON. So here we go. So this is the exact same response that we would get inside of the result we get from the API here. It's exactly the same. We're just passing it through our own API instead, so we can use it in our front-end applications like our React app we're going to make. Okay, so let's see. In the next section, we are going to pass in query parameters also, so we can decide how many results we want, this top parameter here. And we are also going to pass in the keyword parameter. So now we are going to be using the request object we have up in the function here. So that's what you can use to pass in query parameters. Inside the original API request we have here, we have this params tab, and it has the top include facets and keyword parameters, query parameters you call them. So if they're actually included in the URL up here, there's a question mark, then there's one query parameter here. If I take it off, it disappears from the URL up here. And so basically we're going to try and read those from the request we sent to our own API and pass it into the next Nordstrom API. So the way to get these query parameters is to write like this. So we say the top variable here, we call it number of top, and I will say request dot query dot top. So that's going to look in the query object inside of request and get the top parameter. And then we have keyword, and for the keyword we need to encode URI encoded which is what you can see it's going on here. The space is being encoded as a %20. So it's something you can call inside of JavaScript, like encode URI component, and then we pass in the query keyword parameter. Now we can use these inside of a URL here. So I will make these into backticks instead. So we can put in variables. So I will take this, instead of make it in hard-coded 10, I will put in a $sign and curly braces and write in number of top. And for the keyword, the same thing, $sign, curly braces, and write in key. And I'm just gonna to rename this into keyword using F2. So keyword instead. And that's basically it. So of course you need to make sure that when you make a request, you set these parameters, because if you don't, it's not going to pass anything in here. Maybe you could make something clever where you have defaults, but this is just a really simple example. Let's try and see if it works. So now in our local API, we need to pass in these query parameters. Remember what we call them? We call it top and keyword. It's basically the same as we did in the original API. So let's call it top to get the free results here. And then we have keyword. Let's call it red dresses. And there we go. So now we get the results for red dresses, the top 3 ones. And let's see how the URL looks like, just to make sure it is properly formatted. I will do a console log URL. I will make a request again and check how the URL looks. Looks good. We get the %20, just like we had in the original API call. So all is good now. Now it's actually time for us to build the React app and start using this API we built inside of the React app. Alright everyone, in this section we're going to create our React app that is utilizing the backend we just created. So the first thing we need to do is to use the create React app application. And so if you Google create React app, you can see there's a page here. And if you follow the command npx create React app, my app, it's going to create a directory containing sort of a scaffolding for a React app. So let's go ahead and try and do that. npx create React app, and then I'm going to type in client as the app name instead. So it's going to create a new directory inside of Nordstrom folder that's called client, and that's where we're going to have our React client running. Now, once this is done, you can see inside, you basically have to say cd client and run yarn start. So let's go ahead and do that. Cd client, yarn start. And now it's going to run the bundler that is creating the React app. And once it has done compiling, bundling, and so on, you should see a spinning React logo here. And I'm going to take my Visual Studio Code and drop it right next to the browser so we can see while we edit the code. Now let's look inside of the client. Again, just like with Node.js Express, you could have a whole course about React also. There is a whole course out there. There's lots of courses out on React. And I'm not going to go into too much detail and explain everything about React. But again, we're going to get something up and running to display the results from the Nordstrom API. So first of all, what you want to check is inside the app.js file, which is inside the source folder in the client folder. This is where we are going to have our app written itself. And inside React, you have a syntax called JSX, which means you basically have everything inside of components, and you have a mixture of HTML, XML, and JavaScript. So if you're not familiar with React, this can be quite a bit of a shock, a lot of things going on. Again, if you want to learn more about React, go ahead and get a full course for it, but we're absolutely going to build something that is displaying the results. Alright everyone, in this section we're going to create our React app that is utilizing the backend we just created. So the first thing we need to do is to use the create React app application. And so if you Google create React app, you can see there's a page here. And if you follow the command npx create React app, my app, it's going to create a directory containing sort of a scaffolding for a React app. So let's go ahead and try and do that. npx create React app, and then I'm going to type in client as the app name instead. So it's going to create a new directory inside of Nordstrom folder that's called client, and that's where we're going to have our React client running. Now, once this is done, you can see inside, you basically have to say cd client and run yarn start. So let's go ahead and do that. Cd client, yarn start. And now it's going to run the bundler that is creating the React app. And once it has done compiling, bundling, and so on, you should see a spinning React logo here. And I'm going to take my Visual Studio Code and drop it right next to the browser so we can see while we edit the code. Now let's look inside of the client. Again, just like with Node.js Express, you can have a whole course about React also. There is a whole course out there. There's lots of courses out on React. And I'm not going to go into too much detail and explain everything about React. But again, we're going to get something up and running to display the results from the Nordstrom API. So first of all, what you want to check is inside the app.js file, which is inside the source folder in the client folder. This is where we are going to have our app written itself. And inside React, you have a syntax called JSX, which means you basically have everything inside of components, and you have a mixture of HTML, XML, and JavaScript. So if you're not familiar with React, this can be quite a bit of a shock, a lot of things going on. Again, if you want to learn more about React, go ahead and get a full course for it, but we're absolutely going to build something that is displaying the results. Now, the first thing we need to do is to actually make a request, try and see if we can make a request to our API from the React app. So let me just close the folder over here, and then we're going to go inside a React component lifecycle function, which is called component.mount. Inside here, this is where you usually want to run API calls that you make. Let's try and see. So we're going to look in the console, see what result we get. We use something called fetch to call the API. So we say HTTP, and we're just gonna look inside of Postman to see what we could use. This is the request we make to our API. This one, we know it works. So I copy that in here. And I will say response, const response, await. And we're actually going to copy this into another function, async function called fetch products. Because we're going to use await. So async fetch products. And then inside component amount, which is going to be launched every time we reload this page, it's going to call the fetch products. Just like that. And so this await fetch products, and it uses the query to our own local API. And then you need to do const JSON and say await response.json. So this is going to convert or only get the JSON from the response. Then we can say console.json to see if we're actually getting the result from the API. And now you can see it's saying access to fetch at our API from origin localhost 3000. That is the React location, React app location, has been blocked by the course policy. No access control allow origin header is present on the requested resources. So this is why we are building our own backend instead of just using Nordstrom API in our React app. Is because our browsers like Chrome have the security feature where they check for the course policy on resources you're requesting. Now the way to fix this is pretty easy. All we do is we go inside the terminal again, and then we add the course packets, CORS, yarn add course. And once that is done, we go inside the backend. I have the backend code here, which is inside backend index.js. And we add the course packets. So let's see, const course require course. And then we'll just say, after we created the app here, we'll say app.use and then pass in course. And that's simply going to enable course or access control allow origin. It's going to enable you to request the resource inside the React app, which is a different location. If you're using this in a production environment, make sure that you specifically enable only a specific domain, so not everyone can request from your API or use it inside their web apps. Just something to keep in mind if you intend to do this for production. You need to set a specific domain instead of just allowing everyone. But for this small test sample project we're doing, it is absolutely fine to do it like this. Now, let's see if we get the result now. And there we go. We get the JSON here from app.js15. That is the console log here. Now let's expand it, and we can see we have the JSON here with the products object, which has an array of 3 products. So they have the name, which is the name of the product. There's some media array, which contains path to the images, the images of the addresses and so on. So now all we need to do is to make up some JSX to display these results. So inside of React, you kind of save everything as a state. Right, so inside we will build a constructor for the component. And the constructor takes in props, and you pass in props to the super component of this component. It is, I actually can't remember exactly why I do it. This is just something I always do inside React component. And it's not something we use for any particular reason in this example. But then we say this state, we set a specific state. I will just by default set the JSON to be an empty object. And this is good for when, well, it's a good practice for developers so they can see, okay, inside the component we're using the different properties here. We're using JSON somewhere in this component and so on. Now let's see. So after we get the JSON, let's set the state of the JSON. So we say this set state, and we put in JSON. And this is a shorthand for saying, well, instead of saying JSON like that, setting JSON to be this, we can just put it as JSON because it's the same name in both the state and the one we want to set. Basically, this command is just setting the state of JSON that we received from the API to be this. Now I have a pause in my debugger. I'm not sure why. I will just continue on. And now, like as I said, we need to display the results as well. And the way we do that is to inside the render, before the return call here, the return function, we do a const of the products. And so we map over the products here. Actually, first we want to check if this state of JSON, and remember it was the products array. So we say products, and this is going to check if the state has been set already, because actually when we first start up the app, the JSON array is not being set, or the products array is not being set. It's only after the component mounts and it fetches the products, then it's going to update the state with the proper JSON. So the first render of this component does not have the products array. That's why we have to have this if in here. Now, then if there is a products array, we do a map over it. So this state.json.products.map, and then we can say we return for each product. We will return just a div with a, let's say, a product name like that. And then actually we should define products up here first, products as null, and then we define products here if there is any products we got from the API, and then we pass them in here. I delete all this between the header, and I put in my products. Remember the curly braces as available here. And then we can see the text of all the products that we're getting here. So, and there's a warning here that each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. And this is something you require inside of React. So you need to pass in a key attribute here, and you need to define a key. And luckily, each of these products have a ID. We can use the SKU ID instead. So let's say product.SKU ID. That's going to define our key, and now the warning is gone. Next up is we're going to put in an image, or the image of the product. So let's see. Let's put in an image. So it's just going to be an image, like an image HTML element. We pass in, well, we have the product image in here. So products, we have media, which is an array main image with the path. Now it's not a full URL path, so we have to figure out what is the full URL path of this image. Let's go on to Nordstrom. Let's figure it out what the full URL for this image is. Let's search for red dresses. And let's take a look at one of the images using Chrome Developer Tools. And I click this one. And we can see, looks like there's an image up here. So when I click on this one and you go one element up, this one with the image gallery store product soon, you can double click on the URL and then you can copy it, put it inside your URL up here. And we see a nice picture we get here. And if I delete the query parameters after the JPEG extension here, delete that, then we just get a pure picture. And now you can see there's this path here, and this is the path we can use from the API result. So if I go and take the path from the API result inside the media array for each product, and I copy that, and I paste it inside this URL instead. Let's remove the double slashes here. And I paste it inside the URL here. Then I get an image. So what we need to do is we take this URL that we found from the Nordstrom site, from clicking on one of the images, we take that URL and use it inside our React app. So we go and define we need to change this one to be curly braces instead, because we need to do a little logic in it to define our URL. So remove the parentheses here and put in curly brace. Let's see. It's because I haven't ended the image tag here. That's why it was red. Let's see. What does it say? Must have one parent element. Okay. So in React, you need to have a surrounding parent element if you have multiple parent elements you're returning, which means that you have to enclose it like this. You can just enclose it like that with two square, I don't know, no, not square, but arrowheads or whatever you call it. And then since we have the curly braces now, instead of the round parentheses, we need to say return and surround this with a round parentheses. So, and yeah, so it's giving me a warning about that I don't have anything in here, but we're going to do that. Now let's see. So remember to have the image URL inside your clipboard, which I didn't have. So I need to go and find it again. So I use developer tools and take this one. and then cut out the URL so we only get the JPEG at the end, just like that. Then I'm going to paste it in here, and now we cut off this end here, actually this one, and then we say plus product, and then we go look inside the JSON. Actually, no, it doesn't show. It is product media, and then we just take the first element and we say path, I think it is. Actually, let me take a look inside of Postman. It is media for each product, the media first item we can take, and we say path. Okay, so media first item, path with a big capital P, like that, and then we can pass in the image URL here. Now let's see people. Oh, is there no pictures yet? Let's see. So it's still saying each child in an array should have a key property, because we have the key attribute down here, the div, but we need to have one in the surrounding parent element. So let's just make this into a div instead, and then have a key property. Let's see, why is it complaining has no corresponding closing tag? That's because I need to have the closing tag this end. Okay. Now let's see if we can get some images. I think I need to set maybe a width also. And I'm not sure that's what I'm missing right now. Oh yeah, okay. So once I set a width, the images actually appeared. Or actually the images are so big when I don't set it that I didn't see it. So set a width attribute, and there we go. Now we get some pictures. Yep. And next thing we need to do is we need to have a little fancy form at the top where we can say how many results do we want to get and what kind of search term do we want to use. Yep. And next thing we need to do is we need to have a little fancy form at the top where we can say how many results do we want to get and what kind of search term do we want to use. Yeah, so the way to do that is we go down to our return element down here for the whole app, the one with the class name app here, and we start to make a form. So we say form, and then we say on submit. We say this handle submit. So this is this is a function that's being called once we submit the form. And we're going to write that up here. Handle submit. And this will basically query the API with our parameters. Now let's see. Oh, it just removed the end tag of the form. I didn't want that. So we put in a label here. Let's call it the amount, the number of items we want to get. And we have an input of the type number. And we have a value of this input, which is going to be equal to this state.amount. And we have a unchanged. So what happens when we change this amount? We'll call the function this handle amount change and close the input tag, and that should be it. Let's see. So now we have this little amount here, but there's no value inside because we haven't defined a state or amount value inside our state. Up in the constructor, let's go and add the amount. Set it by default to be free when you start up. And you can see it sets it to free here. Now nothing happens also when I click on the buttons and try to change it. It's stuck at free. And the reason is we need to write the handle on handle amount change function. Let's go ahead and write that. Handle amount change. And in here, we are going to take in an event. And then we set the state be equal to, we set the amount state to be equal to the event target value. So that's basically React getting the whatever value you're setting this input box to be. Now if you try and run it again, nothing happens again because it says it cannot read property set state of undefined. So it's like this is undefined. And in React, whenever you write a function, most of the time, especially when you call it from the render function here, if you want to use this in it, you need to bind it. The way to bind it is to write this handle amount change, and you write this handle amount change dot bind this. I could go into a wild explanation about why this works. It has something to do with the context of this disappearing in JavaScript. I can't remember exactly how it works. I just learned to, anytime I want to use this inside of a function, I usually have to bind it, which you can do inside the constructor, for example, like this. So remember to bind it, and then we can change the amount value to anything we want to. Next thing is we should have a little submit button here. So when we submit it, it's going to get 10 amounts of the traces we search for. So remember on the form we had this on submit that says that's making a call to this handle submit. Let's do that. So let's write out that function. So first thing we'll do is to say event prevent default. So that's going to prevent the form from refreshing our app to prevent it from just displaying the same results again. Now what we're going to do is we're going to call the API instead with this parameter, which is from the amount instead. So we'll say fetch products. This dot fetch products, and we'll pass in this state amount, and we add the parameter amount here, and also remember to bind the function. So this handle submit, this handle submit dot bind this. And let's pass in, let's turn this into string little, so backticks instead of the quotes, and then put in a $, curly braces, and pass in amount instead. And instead of having it add component, well, we can do a componented amount and just pass in this state amount here. So it starts out having the 3 amounts. Unexpected use of event on line 31. That is because I don't have the event in my argument here for handle submit. So just add that. So now it starts out with component amount. It fetches the default amount of 3. We can change the amount here. We still need a submit button, but we have written out our handle submit. Let's add the input submit button. So input type submit and value submit, close the tag. Now we have a submit button here. Let's change it to 12. And there you go. So now you can see there's more results now. So now we're getting 12 dresses instead of just 3. Let's change it again to 20. You can see that it adds more products now. So now we can change the amount, and now the next step is to also change the search query inside of this form. So we need to add another input type of text where we can type in the search query and pass it to our API.
Now let's put in a default search term of red dress, and then pass in this state search term to fetch products at component mount, and then pass in the variable here, $. I also need to add it to the arguments of fetch products here. So search term, then have it inside here, search term. So now we start up the query again, just with our state instead. And now we need to add in the input type text, input type text. Value we can set to this state search term. We also need to write a onChanged function for this. So this handle search term change and an enter tag. So let's write the handle search term change. Again, taking in the event, and we'll set the state of search term to be equal to event target value. Now also remember to bind it because we're using this inside it. This handle amount change. This handle search term change. Yeah, this handle search term change. Oops. Dot bind. Pass in this. Now it's binding this, so we can use this set state inside it. Now let's see. So it starts out with red dress, and we can try and change it to blue dress. Then let's try and make the call. And it looks like it is not passing in the correct search term because they don't look like dresses, these ones. I think this is just a default search result it's giving us. Let's see. Yeah, of course. It's because inside of our handle submit function, we need to also pass into this state of search term. So now it should be working fine. Let's search for blue shorts. And there we go. We get some nice, I don't know if that's shorts, but we get some results now. Let's try and change some things up. And we can search for shoes. And we get lots of shoes. So people, that is how you reverse engineer a site and find a API, and also how you build a backend that is taking advantage of this API, and again how you can build a front-end application that can display this this API result, and totally avoiding writing any kind of scraper for your web scraping. Basically, you avoid writing any kind of web scraping, so it's going to save you a lot of time. I hope you got something out of this tutorial, and I'll see you next time. And any questions you have, feel free to message me.